you're streaming this as you are headed somewhere fun for the holiday weekend, but watch out because this is a big test for the airlines and the highways, with a lot of people trying to get that last-minute trip in before the unofficial end of summer on Labor Day. We'll talk about what we're hearing from travelers after a summer of missed connections and the forecast for what will be a hot holiday weekend. We're also learning something on the politics front, that the FBI seized more than 11,000 documents at former President Trump's Florida home. But what may be more interesting here is what they could not find. Why the DOJ's got to be worried about those empty folders labeled classified. Plus, my conversation with a member of the January 6th Select Committee on who she would like to hear from next. And have you heard about Argentina basically shut down right now after this assassination attempt against the country's vice president? Even soccer games are getting canceled today. Well, we're finding out about the alleged shooter, who the president there says actually pulled the trigger on a loaded gun. Plus, more than 1,000 Apple employees protesting the company's return to work policy. In tonight's original, staffers tell us they're doing just fine at home. And the talented Mr. Roto comes to NBC. Fantasy football wizard Matthew Berry tells us why he thinks you can't cover the NFL without covering fantasy and sports betting. By the way, that's a little bit later on in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and right now you've got airlines getting tested big time after a season you know has been full of delays, cancellations, lost luggage. With Labor Day weekend almost upon us, basically on us right now if you live in the East Coast, holiday travel overall is really rebounding from this time last year. You've got about a third of the country planning on going somewhere this holiday weekend, according to AAA, and most of them are going to be driving, more than 80%. The rest, they'll take their chances on a flight even after some nightmare stories this summer. And today, some passengers told us they were expecting the worst. Listen.
I know I'm going to get there early. I had mixed feelings about it, actually. I was kind of, I had some anxiety about traveling now.
We'll take a look at how the weather is looking for the long weekend. But first, let's hit up Ellison Barber at JFK Airport in New York. So, Ellison, so far, so good there. What's up?
Yeah, it seems like maybe that is the case. I don't want to speak too soon and jinx anyone, but there's no question airports across the United States are going to be busy today and throughout the long holiday weekend. The question is, will they be busy and smooth? And that remains to be seen. If you have traveled this summer or if you have someone close to you who travels a lot, there's a good chance you or that person has encountered some sort of delay or even flight cancellation throughout the summer. And not necessarily because of weather or things you might expect to cause delays. That has happened, but there has also been a lot of cancellations because of things like pilots not being there, or there simply just not being enough people to staff the airline. Despite all of that, travelers we've spoken to here at JFK, they say so far things have not been that bad. Listen.
Coming from Orlando, the trip was good. No one delay. Other than that, had a nice, safe flight. The terminals wasn't too bad.
The three major U.S. airlines, Delta, United, and American, all expect to have at least 2.5 million passengers each. Big picture, the travel website Hopper says they expect about 12.7 million people to depart airports in the United States, the vast majority of those travelers traveling within the United States. Hallie?
So apart from just the sheer logistics of travel, Ellison, comes how you pay for it, right? How does inflation factor into how much people are spending this weekend? Because it's kind of an expensive time to travel.
Yeah, it really is. And let's look at some numbers here together just sort of to break down where things are now versus pre-pandemic levels. When it comes to air travel, the travel website Hopper says ticket prices this year cost travelers 23% more than last year and 20% more than pre-pandemic levels in 2019. When it comes to car travel, gas prices, they've been dropping in recent weeks, but they are still higher than they were a year ago. According to AAA, the national average right now is $3.81. Gas prices and inflation, they have impacted the way that some travelers are behaving, not just this weekend, but all summer. AAA did a survey recently, and 80% of the people they spoke to said that concerns about gas prices, inflation, wanting to save money here and there, it's impacted the way that they've traveled. There were 5 different things that they said they'd cut back on, and 2 of those 5 things were travel related. They said they'd cut back on driving and also air travel because of the cost. Hallie?
Super interesting. I can only imagine we're going to be seeing more of that potentially as we head into, from summer season to the holiday season coming up for Thanksgiving bookings. Ellison, good to see you. Thank you. So it's not just the travel. I know it's the weather that a lot of us all care about this weekend. And more than likely, depending where you are, it is going to be super duper hot. 48 million people out west are under heat alerts tonight as we're on track for one of the most serious September heat waves in history for that area, one of the most significant, because starting tomorrow, you're going to see and feel record hot temps from California to Montana. Out in L.A., the heat and two big wildfires are really testing California's power grid. And the heat's hitting people in low-income communities the most. They are 4 times more likely to go to the ER for heat-related conditions than people who can afford to live in, like, buildings that have good AC or well-maintained, according to this new UCLA study that's out today. You can see here on this map the parts in red showing the areas with the most heat-related ER visits. Michelle Grossman joins us now for an outlook on the weekend weather. And I feel like the headline is hot, yeah?
Yeah, I love how you said it. Super duper hot. I mean, that says it all. We are going to be brutally hot over the next couple of days. We started this 2 days ago. We're going to extend it into Tuesday. And it's not just the low income. It's the unhoused. It's the elderly. It's the immune compromised. This is really difficult. It's high heat, but it's also the duration of this heat wave. So 48 million Americans impacted out west by a heat advisory and excessive heat warning. Sacramento, Los Angeles, San Diego. You're going to see temperatures that you probably haven't seen all year long. Los Angeles, you're going to be into the triple digits. It's all due to this area of high pressure, this heat dome. This is the climate connection where we get things stuck in the atmosphere. It's almost like the travel situation where we just can't move our systems out. And that's what's happening with this heat dome here. So it's anchored in place over the 4 corners. It's literally acting as a heat pump, pumping in that hot air. It's closing off any cool air from Canada. And that's why we're going to see records broken, not just daily, monthly, but also all-time records for September as we go throughout the next couple of days. We could see 10 records in 10 states broken. We could see records in 50 cities broken. That is a lot. And we are talking really high temperatures, temperatures that they're not used to all year long, let alone in September. So for the rest of the afternoon, we're looking at Las Vegas 107, Palmdale 107, 102 in Salt Lake City. And Hallie, we're going to keep these temperatures in place until Tuesday.
Michelle Grossman, thank you so much. Good to see you. Appreciate it. Enjoy your weekend. I know you'll be watching those maps. So while you might be kicking off your holiday weekend like Michelle, our newsroom, well, we're bracing for the possibility of a Friday night news dump because any minute now we could get that written ruling from a Florida judge on former President Trump's request for an independent third party to look over those documents taken by the FBI at Mar-a-Lago. Like, we could not get it tonight. It could happen in a day or 2 or whenever. We don't know, right? But while we wait, that judge is unsealing a new and detailed list that tells us more about what exactly the feds took. And it's a fair amount of stuff. You're looking at this? More than 100 documents that are classified. On top of that, though, more than 11,000 government documents that were not classified. Keep in mind, Mr. Trump, under federal law, would not be allowed to take anything, classified or not, because if it's a government document, that stuff belongs to the executive branch. But what's even more interesting here, do you see that number 48? What's more interesting is what they did not find, because there were 48 folders with classified banners that were empty inside, nothing in them. It comes as Republicans are going after the head of the Justice Department today, Attorney General Merrick Garland, with House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy demanding in a new letter that the AG answer questions about the search and turn over documents related to it. Ryan Riley joins us now. And Riley, from the information that we do have so far on this, it's called an inventory list. There's a couple of headlines. One is that this classified stuff was mixed in with things that were kind of random, magazines, articles of clothing, gifts, etc. The other piece are these empty folders, right? Nearly 50 of them, classified banners, nothing inside. I have to think that inside the DOJ, there are alarm bells going off about what was in those documents. How are they gonna figure out what was in the folder? They're gonna have to talk to people, huh?
That's going to be a real challenge because Donald Trump isn't the most organized person in the world, as we've come to learn in the past few days and weeks and months and years, in fact. He tends to hoard a lot of documents. I mean, that 11,000 government documents number just really jumped out at me. I was sitting here on my iPhone right after this came out and adding up those numbers and like passing the 10,000 threshold. And you're like, just imagine how many documents that is. That's not even pages, that's documents. So it could be even more pages than that. Just think of how much paper that is. classes that he took that he's not supposed to have. And that's very important for future generations to have in terms of looking back at the Donald Trump presidency and figuring out what exactly was going on inside that White House during those chaotic 4 years. It's not something that belongs to him under the law. That's not what the government was as focused on. They were most concerned with these classified documents, but he held onto those documents for so long, and at some point you've really got to hit a moment where they actually do something to get those documents back, Hallie.
As it relates to what they have and what they don't have, the investigatory process from here, because again, I talked to one member of Congress who said she is just very concerned about these 48 empty folders. Who would have touched them? Who might have looked at them? Where might those documents be? Maybe they're in the pile of stuff that the government also found, right? Talk about the investigatory process from the FBI on that front here. What are they doing this weekend? Are they all chilling out and taking a break? Are they in a room sifting through this stuff?
I think they've sifted through most of it at this point, but I do think those matches are going to be pretty tough to ultimately make and say, okay, what was in this folder, what was in that folder? If they're just generic folders and didn't have any specific numbers on them necessarily that tied it back to a certain document, that might be more difficult. But the location of those folders is very important because, for example, the issue with the passports, when Donald Trump was complaining about his passports being taken, the reason that was really important was because those passports were found directly in the same box, in the same container as a lot of these classified documents, and that really highly suggests where you keep your passports is where you import important documents, and it suggests that the president himself, the former president himself, I should say, was directly dealing with this. This wasn't an aide. This was Donald Trump himself.
Ryan Riley, thank you for that reporting. I appreciate it. I know you are remaining on standby in case we hear anything else from that federal judge related to the broader issue of this independent third party. We should note here that a Trump spokesperson is responding to this inventory list we've just talked about, accusing the FBI of a, quote, smash and grab at Mar-a-Lago. And it comes as the former president's son-in-law and former senior advisor at the White House, Jared Kushner, is talking with our colleagues at Sky News in an exclusive interview. Watch.
This seems like it's an issue of paperwork that should have been able to be worked out between DOJ and him. I don't know what he took or what he didn't take, but I think right now we're relying on leaks to the media, which is the same thing.
That aligns with the argument that former President Trump's legal team has been making, that they think this was the criminalization of documents that the former president should have been allowed to have, essentially. Kushner also says he's talked about the DOJ, of course, is pushing back on that legally. Kushner says he's also been talking about another potential 2024 campaign with his father-in-law, saying that Mr. Trump has not made up his mind, he says, about whether or not to run. As we talk about, Kushner, by the way, also says he was totally unaware of the details of what was going on during the January 6th attack. He had been traveling overseas and had just returned back to Washington. Speaking of that, there is news on the January 6th front and the DOJ's investigation into that day, with ex-White House counsel Pat Cipolloni and ex-deputy White House counsel Pat Philbin appearing today before a federal grand jury. They only walked out a few hours ago. You can see them side by side. They weren't physically side by side. We're showing you the pictures side by side as they entered court. Neither of them talked with reporters. But here's the thing. Even though these grand juries are kind of black boxes, right? By their very nature, we as members of the public don't get to know what happens behind those closed doors. In this particular instance, when it comes to Cipolloni, we think we kind of have a sense of what he probably talked about. Why? Because he said it already to the House Select Committee on January 6th, which they then showed the public, where Cipolloni said a number of times that he did not back the conspiracy theories pushed by Mr. Trump and others about the 2020 election. Gary Grumbach is outside the courthouse because, Gary, there are a couple of big differences here, right? This is a criminal investigation, but also Cipolloni is not quite as protected by executive privilege claims as he was when he was speaking to Congress.
Yeah, he's not, and that's thanks to a 1974 Supreme Court decision you may have heard of, USA v. Nixon. I want to read you a portion of that decision here. They said presidential privilege, when subpoenaed in a criminal investigation, quote, cannot override the needs of the judicial process if that claim is merely on the grounds of a generalized interest in confidentiality. Now, because the House committee isn't a criminal investigation, the grand jury may very well have gotten more information today than that House committee did a few months ago. But we do generally know, as you mentioned, what Cipolloni is thinking thinking. He agreed with the Attorney General Barr. There was no widespread fraud in the 2020 election, and he thought that if Trump went to the Capitol, that he would be charged with, quote, every crime imaginable. Now, eventually, this grand jury is going to have to make some decisions here. They're going to have to decide who they charge, if they charge anybody, and what those charges are. Now, we don't know any of that information yet, and Hallie, it may not actually come anytime soon because federal grand juries can last anywhere from 18 months to 36 months.
That's the grand jury, right? That's the DOJ investigation into the insurrection. There's this congressional investigation led by the January 6th committee. And on that front, we're also hearing that they want to hear from former House Speaker Newt Gingrich. I talked with one member of the select committee, Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, just in the last couple hours, Gary, as to whether she'd like to hear from two other potential witnesses, former Vice President Mike Pence and Ginny Thomas, of course, the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. There's been a lot of speculation around, will the committee call them? Won't they? They had a meeting yesterday in which Benny Thompson, the chair, said they were talking about it. Congresswoman Lofgren was careful, as you might imagine, Gary, not to make any announcements, but she did give us her personal take on this. Watch. Is that something you want, Congresswoman?
Personally, I would like to hear from Ms. Thomas. We know quite a lot about what happened with the vice president because so many of his key people came in and talked to us. But there's a few other things we could ask the former vice president. So, I'd like to hear from him.
The question is, will they ask them? How far will they go if they do ask them? And the other question is, what happens? It's September 2nd. Somehow already, Gary, and we know in September they're going to hold at least one more public hearing.
Yeah, something that's been stressed to us is that even though they didn't have any public hearings in August, it wasn't just because they were sitting on the beach enjoying their summer. They've been investigating. They've been doing things like sending letters to Newt Gingrich. But the clock is ticking on this committee because they need to fill out that whole report, too, with all the information associated with actually what they found throughout this entire investigation. And because House Republicans made it very clear that this committee is not going to exist in its current form if House Republicans take the House come November. Hallie?
Gary Grumbach live for us there outside that courthouse in D.C. Thanks, Gary. Good to see you. To Argentina now, where crowds got together this afternoon at the presidential palace to show their support for Vice President Cristina Fernandez after a failed assassination attempt against her. The country pretty much shut down today, but people are out in support after she was almost shot right outside her home in Buenos Aires. The alleged shooter, a 35-year-old Brazilian man living in Argentina who is now in custody. And here's the thing about this. Whole thing was caught on camera. This is the video. Here's the VP as she walks by a crowd of people. Look at this. Somebody jumps by. That's the gun. Points a gun in her face. Look at how close he is. So he tries to shoot, but no bullets came out. The president of Argentina says the gun was loaded. It had 5 bullets there. The trigger was pulled, but for some reason it didn't actually fire. That is terrifying. It's coming. There have been demonstrations outside her house related to this ongoing trial where she's being accused of corruption during the time when she was the country's president. Kerry Sanders is joining us now. And Kerry, we've seen a bunch of demonstrations in Argentina this summer protesting this administration and some of these corruption allegations. I wonder what else you know about the shooter, whether this attack may be tied to those protests in any way, and just the sheer drama of the video that we've all seen now.
The video is just mind-boggling, especially when you actually even hear the click in that video of the trigger being pulled, and you could either call it a jam or it was a misfire. Bottom line is the gun did not go off. The authorities do have the attempted assassin now in custody. They've identified him as 35-year-old Fernando Andres Sabag Montiel. He's originally from Brazil, has been in Argentina for at least 10 years. While they have him in custody, they cannot, at least at this point, share publicly of what the motivation was. It's unclear from the police and those who are talking whether they've actually been able to determine what the motive was. And they went to his house today because they want to know, as they were going through his house last night and again today, to determine whether was he acting alone or was he acting with others. You know, there has been obviously protests over the investigation into allegations of corruption, but there is also a severe economic crisis in Argentina, one that's really been going on for quite some time. But we're talking about inflation this year that's going to hit close to 100%. And that has been a really difficult pinch on people who are in the middle and lower class. So again, what the motivation is, we don't know. We do know that the gunman had several Nazi tattoos on him. But again, whether that has any relation to this attempted assassination, again, we don't know. The authorities are getting to the bottom of it and eventually will share a lot more details with us, Hallie.
And part of it, too, Carrie, is that this didn't happen in a vacuum, right? There is video evidence. We've showed several clips of this, right? Like, there is a record of what went down and what happened here. And in part of it, you can see, like, if we let the video, I don't know if we can let the video play out longer. First of all, you can tell the moment when she realizes there's a gun in her face, right? Sheer terror. And then the crowd, people are like, oh, my God, right? People are stunned.
It appears that she is the first person to even recognize what's going on because it happens so quickly. And so you see her kind of like processing what's going on as everybody else is around cheering her on. I mean, these are supporters. I mean, today now in Buenos Aires, there are thousands of people taking to the streets to support her. Even some of her harsher critics now are at least respecting her bravery in the aftermath of what happened here. I mean, yeah, to see this from multiple angles and to see it is just, it really is, I mean, it's real. It's real.
Yeah, and we talked about how the country's pretty much shut down today. Even some of the soccer matches were canceled. Carrie Sanders, thank you so much for that reporting.
And that says everything about Argentina if you shut down soccer matches, yeah.
Sure does, Carrie. Carrie, thank you. We're going to keep our eyes on what happens and the developments on that story. But let's take you to Pakistan now. Another serious international story developing tonight, because we're learning that more than 1,200 people have died in flooding that's left almost a third of the country underwater. I need you to think about that in the context of America. It is as if the entire state of Wyoming was under, like, think about that. Think about if you lived in America and the news reports came on and said all of Wyoming has flooded, what a big deal that would be, right? This is a huge deal. It is a humanitarian crisis. So today the U.S. is announcing they're going to be trying to help. They're sending an assessment team over to figure out what they can do. Because right now, so much of the focus is on relief. With hundreds of people dead, how do you get food? How do you get medicine? How do you get tents for people to sleep in the country? They can't go back home. Their homes are flooded. You've got aid agencies warning about the potential for outbreaks of diseases. Tens of millions of people are out of their houses. And it's monsoon season, right, which usually does bring heavy rain. But this year has been the wettest it's been in Pakistan in decades. Hallie is joining us now. And Hallie, I think it's important that we show people what's happening, because the UN is calling the scale of devastation here unimaginable. Like, it is horrific, sort of what you see on the ground right now.
That's right, Hallie. The sheer magnitude and devastation is hard to fathom there. We're seeing a country absolutely ravaged by floods. The UN General Secretary called it a monsoon on steroids, which he clearly blamed on climate change. Look, the catastrophic deluge has submerged, as you said, a third of the world's fifth most populated country. Before and after satellite images show the extent of the damage across Pakistan. The images show swathes of green fields, villages, buildings before monsoonal rains and flooding. Satellite images reveal the same areas later covered in brown water. In some parts, the roads have disappeared and floodwaters have created their own rivers. Over 100 bridges and almost 2,000 miles of roads have been destroyed. 800,000 farm animals have been killed. 2 million acres of crops and orchards have been flooded. Homes and livelihoods wiped out, Hallie. 33 million people have been affected by these floods. Nearly 500,000 displaced people are living in relief camps, and thousands of people now are suffering from diarrhea, skin infections, and other waterborne ailments. Many pregnant women living in flooded areas are also exposed to risks. And according to the UN Children's Agency, more than 3 million children are in need of humanitarian assistance and stand at a heightened risk of disease, drowning, and malnutrition. So it's a dire situation on the ground in Pakistan.
And it is also whiplash from what we saw a couple of months ago when there were heat waves there that killed dozens of people. You mentioned it here, but it's important to talk about the climate change factor.
Absolutely. In fact, experts are saying that this should be a wake-up call to the world on the threats of climate change. And Pakistan is located on a place on the globe which bears the brunt of two major weather systems. One can cause high temperatures and drought, like the heat wave we saw in March. Another brings monsoon rains that we're seeing now. Now, the science linking the climate change and the more intense monsoon is pretty simple. Global warming is making air and sea temperatures rise, leading to more evaporation. Warmer air can hold more moisture, making monsoon rainfall more intense, bursting riverbanks and landing on very parched land that can't absorb the water, triggering mass floods that we're seeing now, wrecking people's lives.
What's scary, too, is that there's more rain on the way, potentially, which is why you have officials there telling people to try to get somewhere safer, if you will. Talk about the evolution on the ground there in the next few days or next few weeks.
Well, absolutely. All of this is in the hands of climate change and Mother Nature. If there's a lull in the rainfall, then Pakistan can try and press ahead with this enormous task of rescue, relief and rebuilding to try and bring the lives of 33 million people affected by the floods back to some kind of normality. But Hallie, the forecast isn't good. More heavy rain is expected, especially in the south, where people are bracing themselves for even yet more flooding to surge down from the Indus River, creating more devastation, more destruction and misery. If the weather continues to unleash relentless downpours, then that will create conditions for an extremely harsh winter for the people in Pakistan. So really, it's only going to get worse.
Ali Arouzi, I'm so glad that you're bringing us this reporting, and I'm glad you're staying on top of it. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. We got a lot more to come this hour. Apple is ready to make workers head back to the corporate office, but hundreds of those staffers say this is not the way to go.
We're not advocating for everybody always to work from home. Not every job can do that, but we're arguing for flexibility.
Plus, new within just the last hour, actress and activist Jane Fonda says she is in a fight against cancer. What she wants her supporters to know about this diagnosis of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, that's next. Take two for the Artemis 1 moon mission team tomorrow after some setbacks, earlier this week, fuel leaks and a bad engine sensor forcing NASA to cancel the original Artemis launch on Monday. So the new launch window, it is tomorrow, 2:17 p.m. Eastern to be exact. It's a window, so it goes for a couple hours after that. Inside, 3 test dummies in the crew capsule. They're going to fly around the moon and back over the course of 6 weeks. And the engineers working on the launch of NASA's most powerful rocket, they're feeling pretty good about the fixes they've made. But here's one thing that could change things. Weather, right? We have no control over that, and neither does NASA. Officials say you could still see some delays, but there's a 60% chance weather will not get in the way. So a 40% chance that you're going to see some Florida thunderstorms interfere. We've got Jake Ward at the Kennedy Space Center. I mean, is it going to storm? Is it not? Are the main engines good to go? We think they are. That's what the engineers say. There's like a lot of drama around this Artemis thing.
It is endless, Hallie, just to sort of see how the folks here deal with this. I mean, you really cannot imagine just how many variables are involved, right? We're talking, first of all, of course, about the mechanical variables. And the reason that I'm standing here with you today talking about this second attempt is because the first attempt had to be scrubbed because basically they had 2 problems. One, there was a minor hydrogen leak. The hydrogen is the main fuel that makes this thing go. And the second was just an inability to get the engine cool enough is what they thought at the time. It turned out the engine was cool enough, just one of the sensors wasn't registering properly. And what's so amazing about this and what it teaches about us is just how complicated these engines are, right? They talk about there being about 500 variables that they have to go through in their checklist. All of those have to be green before they say yes. If you imagine, Hallie, taking your car to, an auto mechanic and then basically saying, you cannot have this thing back until we have made sure there's no lint on the seats and everything's perfect, a team of 1,000 making sure your car is in perfect running order. It's that kind of thing that we're looking at here. And of course, the weather is the other big variable, and nobody's got any control over that.
Totally. Lord, if I did that with my car, Jake, I'd never get it back. We're looking at a live picture, by the way, of the rocket. I mean, this is it. This is what's happening. We're looking at this. What happens if Artemis doesn't launch tomorrow, Jake?
Well, so if it doesn't go tomorrow, then the next possible window is possibly Monday, could be Tuesday. It depends on what goes on there. If it doesn't happen then we're talking about September 19th. And past that, the window for this ends in October, early October. And that has to do with not just the weather and everything else. It has to do with the relationship between the position of the moon and the Earth. There are so many variables involved. One of the big things that's going to determine whether this thing goes tomorrow or has to wait until October has to do with the big building you see behind me, the vehicle assembly building. This 30-story rocket, if it has to be rolled back for some reason to do this, that sets everything back by a week or more. And so they're really hoping that whatever happens, they may have to scrub it because of weather. That's considered a pretty good problem in NASA's book. They just don't want to have to take it off the launch pad where you can see it sitting at this hour, Hallie.
If everything goes well, right, the point of this is to get astronauts back on the moon by 2025. But what has to happen? There's like, this program is important to NASA. What has to happen between like tomorrow, if it goes up, and humans back on the moon in 3 years?
Well, so there's basically 3 flights that would make that possible. The first is the one that we're looking at here. That involves, as you mentioned, human dummies that will go up on the Orion capsule that goes with it. Those dummies are, for me, a source of incredible personal fascination because the whole point of it is to figure out what exactly spaceflight is doing to humans, right? I mean, this is the thing. Those dummies include, and not a lot of people have talked about this, organs, fake organs inside them that are radiation sensitive. They have a female anatomy dummy with a uterus inside it to see how uteruses are affected by deep space radiation. It's that kind of stuff that they're testing, not to mention what happens to the human body when you re-enter the atmosphere at about 25,000 miles an hour. It's all of that that then will let them know, okay, can we go with the second flight, which would be a crewed flight, and then the third flight might actually put people on the moon. At that point, we're looking for water. We're looking for the possibility of fuel sources that could take a rocket onto Mars from there, right? The ambitions are enormous here, and that is, of course, why this is so expensive, taking so long, and why they're going to be so cautious tomorrow, Hallie.
Man, they want to get it right. There's so much riding on this. Jake, I'm jealous of your front row seat, okay? I'm setting my alarm tomorrow for 2 p.m. because I want to watch it with you. So thank you so much for being there for us. It's good to see you. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, sticking with space, NASA's James Webb Space Telescope has taken its first picture of a planet that is outside of our solar system. The planet's extremely catchy name is HIP 65426b. It's a gas giant with no rocky surface. It means that there's probably not other life on it. But the observations do give us a hint at how the Webb telescope could be used to look for other planets that might have life on them, maybe in the universe. I mean, does that blow your mind? It should. Number 2, the Department of Veterans Affairs announced today, that it will provide abortions in cases of rape, incest, and when there is a danger to a woman's health, quote, regardless of state restrictions. The VA says the change is necessary and comes after multiple states have restricted abortion access after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. Number 3, actress and activist Jane Fonda is sharing just this evening that she's been diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. The 84-year-old says she's already started chemotherapy. The 2-time Oscar winner made the announcement on Instagram not too long ago. She says, this is a very treatable cancer. 80% of people survive. She says, so I feel very lucky. Number 4, if you are a fan of hitting up the movies, here's a good deal for you. Get some popcorn ready. Tomorrow is National Cinema Day, and you can celebrate it by paying just $3 to go see a movie. The Cinema Foundation is making this possible. They're celebrating this summer's record-breaking return to theaters for a lot of people. More than 3,000 theaters are participating, including AMC, Regal, and some of the not so big franchises, too. Check your local listings. Number 4, Gloria Estefan is celebrating her birthday and her 1989 hit single, Get On Your Feet, with her very own Barbie doll. Look at this, Gloria Barbie. Estefan tells Billboard that when designing her Barbie, she wanted to try to stay true to her multicultural roots. The doll's release arrives ahead of Hispanic Heritage Month, which is September 15th through October 15th. Coming up, we are talking jobs. The August jobs numbers doing better than expected. So what does that actually mean for the state of our economy? And one of the world's most recognizable companies wants employees back in the corporate office. But the situation brewing at Apple might just be a small taste of what could soon happen in other companies across the country, maybe yours. It's The Original tonight. Stay with us. The new jobs report out today shows us employers added 315,000 jobs last month. That's down from 526,000 in July. You see it on the bar graph on your screen here. Yes, it's a little less than the month before, but experts say it still represents consistent growth for the economy. especially compared to before the pandemic, when monthly jobs numbers were on average about 200,000, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This report is super important because it's one of the last big economic reports the Fed will look at before it meets in September, when they make the decision on whether or not to raise interest rates again. Normally, a slowdown in hiring could sound off alarm bells for people, but in this pandemic economy, right, the post-pandemic economy, a bit of a pullback in new jobs may actually be a good sign that the things that the Fed has done to curb inflation could be working. That brings us to tonight's original, an in-depth reporting on a topic we've been keeping an eye on. And of course, with those new jobs numbers in mind, tonight we're looking at what some of those new hires might be dealing with. Working from home or working from the office. What do you do? For some workers, remote work became a way to get the job done. Not for all workers. Some workers did not have the luxury of working from home. Some did. And for those who did, with the pandemic grinding on, you have some corporate offices mapping out their return to office plans as we speak. Come Monday, Apple is expected to start making employees come in at least 3 days a week. And after more than 2 years of being able to work from home, some staffers are pushing back at Apple. They're asking for more flexibility and freedom from the company's leaders. Here's Steve Patterson.
There's a labor resistance brewing in the core of Apple. On Monday, the company is expected to begin enforcing a new return-to-office policy for its corporate workers in the San Francisco Bay Area, at least 3 days a week in the office. That's according to a memo sent out by CEO Tim Cook, which NBC News obtained and was first reported by Bloomberg. The memo said other offices would hear more details shortly. Apple making headlines for the move.
When companies like Apple say something, there's no doubt that they have an outsized sort of influence on the narrative.
But Apple now facing pushback. At least 1,000 people signing a petition under a group of organized employees called Apple Together, demanding more flexible work. It's unclear how many signatures are from retail versus corporate employees.
We're arguing for flexibility.
Stephen McGrath, a software developer who worked for Apple in the 90s and returned 4.5 years ago, says he signed the petition because he's worried about the company's values.
I love Apple as a company, but I'm not enthralled with the policies, and there's been this dissonance between what senior management says and what the rest of the people of Apple are saying to each other.
Well, are you considering leaving the company entirely because of this?
I will say that in the immediate future, because of the situation with COVID, and because, as you can tell, I'm not the youngest person at Apple, the risk is just too high.
Apple did not reply to NBC's request for comment. Some experts say corporate leaders may refuse to budge on return-to-office policies.
I am hearing directly from CEOs and major company CHROs that they're going to stick to it.
Given that we're slightly in a recession right now, you can find out who are your loyal workers by having this screening mechanism of, say, it's time to return to the mothership. And those who don't, this will allow them to shrink their firms a little through voluntary separations versus firing people.
Beyond layoff fears, some experts note that a majority of workers, particularly younger ones, actually want some face-to-face work time.
When we survey employees aged 20 to 29, only 24% want to work fully remote. The reason is they want to get the benefits of mentoring.
Still, some full-time remote workers have grown used to the flexibility of working from home. According to a June Gallup survey of more than 8,000 workers, the desire to work exclusively from home more than doubled since October 2021.
For the work from home revolution to persist, it needs to be the case that workers are both productive at home and the firm can verify this productivity.
And for Apple loyalists like Stephen, he says working from home is worth fighting for.
Even if I don't get what I personally want, I care about the people who are doing the right things. I care about my colleagues.
Steve is joining us now. I think it is a debate that a lot of people are having around the country. I think it's worth noting that not everybody gets the privilege of being able to work from home or the luxury of it. Some workers do not have that ability, right, because of their jobs. But for people who do, there's often the sense that these big tech companies kind of set the tone for others, at least for sure in Silicon Valley and maybe across the country. Are you getting any sense that Apple is like hearing this pushback? How are they responding, et cetera?
You know, I think a little bit, and I think if it's handled within reason, Hallie, one of the things Stephen, that Apple employee told me in that interview, is that the movement isn't about a complete rejection of returning to work. He agrees that some positions within the company absolutely need in-person collaboration. So it's about finding some of that middle ground that both sides can agree on. And he says, at least based on the Apple of the past, based on the company's first ethos, that they should be able to find that middle ground. But on the other hand, these companies have very big goals. They know productivity. And if they want people back in that office, no matter what, it's going to take a whole lot more than what's being proposed right now to get them to budge. Hallie.
Steve Patterson, thank you so much. Good to see you. Appreciate you bringing us that story tonight. We've got some breaking news that's just coming into us in the last few minutes. A federal judge is denying a request by former Trump advisor Steve Bannon for a new trial. You'll remember that Bannon got convicted back in July on a couple of counts of contempt of Congress for defying a subpoena from the January 6th committee. He accused the judge of making an error in his instructions to the jury. But in this ruling, the judge says Bannon's team, and I'm quoting here, cites no authority that lays out why it was an error. So no go on that. It means that Bannon's sentencing will move forward. It is scheduled for October 21st. Still ahead this hour. Right place, right time. We'll tell you about a special delivery in L.A. thanks to a pair of very shocked police officers. Plus, we're counting down to the NFL kickoff with one of our new teammates, fantasy wizard Matthew Berry, joining me to talk about his fresh start and what he's watching for this season on NBC. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Northeast Bureau, New Yorkers might need to start getting ready to say goodbye to those well-known MetroCard stations. The city's in full transition mode to a different system, Tap to Pay, a switch that's expected to be completed by 2023. The machines will disappear around the same time. From our Midwest Bureau, a lost pet parakeet has found its way back home, all thanks to social media. Look at little Blue. Blue escaped from his home outside Chicago last month, but two posts on Facebook, one lost post, one found post, reunited them from 150 miles away. The family who owns Blue immediately jumped into the car and drove 3 hours to get him back. From our West Coast Bureau, a special delivery in Los Angeles with the help of two police officers. The pair responded to a call about a mental health crisis outside a gas station. A woman was screaming. Turns out she was screaming because she was in labor. The baby arrived just moments later. LAPD says mom and baby were taken to a hospital nearby, and they are doing well. So we are less than a week away now from real NFL games, not the preseason, talking about the games that count. And that means if you have a fantasy team, you are running out of time to get that house in order if you are one of the millions of people who live and die by their weekly lineups. And I mean millions, right? We really do mean millions. Look at this. The most recent estimate we could find shows the number of fantasy sports players in the U.S. and Canada has jumped from 500,000 in 1988 to more than 59 million in 2017. 4 in 5 of them almost play fantasy football. And with all due respect to the Denver Broncos, who got Russell Wilson, or the Las Vegas Raiders, who got Devontae Adams, our team at NBC Sports made the biggest pickup of the NFL offseason, Matthew Berry. He is, of course, the wizard whose star has risen with the growth of fantasy sports. He spent a lot of his last 20 years at ESPN building up an audience as the talented Mr. Roto and the occasional SportsCenter appearance. But during that time, he tells me, the network kept fantasy coverage separate from NFL coverage. So, as he told Sports Illustrated, he wanted to move on because he thinks you cannot separate the league from fantasy. You can't separate pro football, the NFL, from your fantasy league that you're in. Here's our conversation. And Matthew Berry is joining us now. Mr. Berry, welcome to the NBC family. We're thrilled to have you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be part of NBC and proud Peacock. It's a full circle moment for me. You know, I literally started my career as a fantasy analyst at rotoworld.com back in 1999. And so, you know, people don't get a chance to come home again. That doesn't happen very often, especially in this business. And so it's pretty cool that kind of a full circle moment for me to get the chance to come back home, see a lot of familiar faces.
I love that you bring that up, too, because I think it speaks to the long career that you have had covering fantasy, right? So now with NBC, you're going to be still doing your love-hate column. Yeah. You're going to be getting a daily show on Peacock and Sirius XM. You're going to be on Football Night in America ahead of Sunday Night Football every week. And I was so struck listening to you talk about the move to NBC that it was really important to you that fantasy coverage be integrated into coverage of the NFL, of the league itself. After these decades covering fantasy, explain why that is so important to you.
Well, because I believe that when you talk about fantasy football, you're talking about the NFL. They're the same conversation. All right, so next Thursday night, when I'm in L.A., I'm on the field at SoFi Stadium, and we're talking about the Bills and Rams, which will air that night on NBC. What I'm going to be doing is I'm talking about the game. I'm talking ball, right? The same thing. Now, I'm going to look at it through a slightly different lens than maybe somebody like a Coach Dungy. But I'm still talking about what I think is going to happen in that game and why I think it's going to happen. So the fact of the matter is that fantasy football and sports betting, for that matter, are a massive way that fans engage with the NFL and with all sports. Over 50 million people play fantasy football. So honestly, I think it's long overdue. And, back at ESPN, again, I'm not trying to throw any stones, but at ESPN, they decided that for a long time, that fantasy football coverage and NFL coverage were two entirely separate entities. And so that is not something that, when my contract was up and I had the opportunity to sort of look around, and NBC said to me, hey, we'll put you on Football Night in America. We want you to be a part of our NFL coverage. My very first day, Sam Flood, the great Sam Flood, said to a room full of executives, Matthew's joining NBC today, and he is part of our NFL coverage. Fantasy is not separate. Sports betting is not separate. And it's part of how we cover the NFL here at NBC. And that meant the world to me. It was important to me that fantasy and sports betting had a voice in NFL coverage. And where better to do it than the premier pregame show in all of America, Football Night in America.
You brought up sports betting, which is another piece of this. Not all fantasy players play for money, but a lot of them do. And there's this stat from the American Gaming Association projecting that some 45 million people would bet on the NFL in 2021. A third of them did using fantasy, right? How has the rise of legal, right? Because this is getting legalized now in places across the country. How has the rise of legal sports betting changed how you see and look at and cover fantasy?
It hasn't really. I mean, you use sports betting in terms of an analysis, like, hey, this is a game that has a high over-under. We expect a lot of points. This is a game to target for some of your players. This is a team that's favored by a lot at home. We expect them to be running more in the second half, so maybe the running back gets in it. So you can use it in terms of your analysis for the game. But I don't believe sports betting and fantasy really have that much in common. They have one big thing in common. The underlying, the underlying thrill there, I think, is that, hey, it gives you a rooting interest in games you might not otherwise care about because you have a bet on the game or because you have a fantasy player in that game. But other than that, there's a social aspect of fantasy football that is very different than, hey, give me the Patriots and the points.
Totally. Yep. I totally agree. We checked your love-hate column for the preseason. Couldn't help but notice I personally have a vested interest in the Philadelphia Eagles. I saw Jalen Hurts is your first love of the preseason.
He's my ride or die this year.
Should I be feeling good? Should I be psyched about the Eagles?
Yeah,
I never am, but
I hear you. I understand. Listen, I'm a Washington Commanders fan, so I completely understand disappointment, especially in the NFC East. But, Hallie, yes, I think they have a great schedule, a great offensive line. That defense is really good. And I do believe Jalen Hurts takes the next step. The addition of A.J. Brown to that offense, I think, is going to make a big difference because we already know about the running, but opening up the passing attack for Philly will make a big difference. You should be cautiously optimistic as an Eagles fan. And as a fantasy manager.
I am never cautiously optimistic, but you love to hear it. Matthew Berry, thank you so much. Good luck. Can't wait to watch you this season. Really appreciate you being on with us.
Thanks, Hallie.
You heard it here first, guys. You heard it. Matthew Berry thinks the Eagles are going to win the Super Bowl. That's what he said, right? We're going to wrap up the week by staying in the sports world. The queen of the court writing another page in her storied career tonight, her legendary career. So will Serena make it 3 for 3? We're live at the U.S. Open next. Serena Williams, she is back on center court tonight facing Australia's Ayla Tomljanovic in the third round of the U.S. Open. And if you have opened your eyeballs, you probably know in the last week that Williams beat the number 2 ranked player in the world, which means she is one step closer now to a title right before she decides to, as she has said, not retire but evolve, which means any of these matches, right? tonight could be Serena's last match ever. It comes after she teamed up with her big sister Venus Williams for the first round of doubles, and even though they lost, they got a standing O from the crowd for what might be their last match together ever. NBC's Maggie Vespa has a solid view at the Arthur Ashe Stadium in Queens. I feel like folks have got to be hype because we are not far away. Like, it's minutes away now that Serena's going to take a swing and try to move on here in the Open.
Exactly. It's minutes away. And by the way, she's just started warming up inside Arthur Ashe Stadium. So we heard the roar from the crowd, and people are seeing her come out for, again, every match at this point could be her last. And we saw that last doubles match last night. The energy there was electric. You can probably hear the music behind me. And this is frankly just one giant party. Everyone we've talked to is keenly aware that they could very well be witnessing history in this moment. Take a listen to what some fans told us earlier today.
She came from nothing, from being very poor, and then, like, you know, like your dreams can come true, and then that you can be good in life and you can give a good example. And I think that's a very good example. The Williams family, it's a very good example for everybody to follow.
And Hallie, you know, her coach has been telling the media, she told us again today, that the fans have been a huge sort of helpful factor for Serena. Their energy, their volume, frankly, has been nearly deafening. And I asked fans out there today who have tickets for tonight, I said, do you think it'll be as loud as it's been on past nights? And multiple people told me it's going to be louder. Like, it's going to be absolutely insane and not surprising at all, Hallie.
One of the things, like, as everybody knows this week, I fully admit I don't watch a lot of tennis. I've been watching, obviously, Serena, and I'm like, are there always this many famous people? Like, are there always this many celebrities showing up to these matches? Like, no, it's the Serena factor, right? Who have you seen?
Wild.
Which stars have you spotted?
I mean, who haven't we seen at this point? Like, you're completely right, though. This is insane to look at the crowd and you just spot Tiger Woods, you spot Hugh Jackman, you spot Spike Lee, Anna Wintour, Vogue editor-in-chief, former President Bill Clinton. Like, the list goes on, and we've been kind of creepy, frankly, watching the crowd looking for more famous people as they walk in tonight. But they just pop up on the monitors and they surprise everybody. And so, you know, it's anyone's guess as to who shows up tonight. But again, the star power has been intense. I also want to point out, alongside those celebrities, a lot of women, a lot of girls, a lot of kids who just know how much Serena's done for the show, or the sport, I should say, and women in the sport. Here to thank her for that part of her legacy, which has meant so much to everyone, Hallie. It's a historic night, clearly.
Yeah. And by the way, a legacy that will continue even off the court as she heads into this next phase of her career. Super important to her, too. Maggie Vespa, great to see you. Have fun tonight. Thanks. That's a wrap for this hour. We will see you here on Monday, same time, same place. Have a great holiday weekend. More coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.